I never meant to stay longer than I had to. Community college wasn't supposed to feel like anything except a place to pass through, cheap credits, get the requirements out of the way, move on. But that semester, I found myself lingering in the same classroom, in the same seat by the window, even after the bell rang. It wasn't because of the subject. English literature was fine, but I wasn't the type who highlighted passages or raised my hand with something clever to say. No, it was her. Ms. Carver. Mid-40s, maybe. Always neat, but never flashy, cardigan sleeves pushed up to her elbows, reading glasses dangling on a thin silver chain. She had a way of holding a book like it was heavier than it looked, and a way of pausing mid-sentence, letting silence fill the air before she continued. She made the room slower. And I found myself addicted to that. The first time she noticed me was nothing. A glance when I dropped my pen. A half-smile when I stumbled over an answer. But it stuck. Like a thumbprint left on glass. There was this small cafe across the street from campus. I'd go there between classes, not because I liked the coffee, they oversteamed the milk, but because sometimes she'd stop in, too. Always the same order, black coffee, no sugar, and a blueberry muffin she never finished. She'd sit with a stack of papers, grading with a fountain pen, the ink a sharp blue that bled through the page. I never talked to her there. Just watched from the corner, pretending to scroll my phone. I'd type out messages I never sent, to no one in particular. Class feels different today. She laughed at something I said. Then I'd delete them. One rainy Thursday, the cafe was crowded, and the only open seat was across from her. She looked up as I hesitated, tray in hand, and gave the smallest nod, like it wasn't a big deal. I sat down. My coffee wobbled in its cup. "You always get the caramel latte," she said, without looking up from her papers. I froze, then laughed quietly. "You noticed." "Hard not to. It's the sweetest thing in this place." It wasn't a joke exactly, but I smiled anyway. She tapped her pen twice on the page, then set it down. For a second, her eyes flicked toward me, steady, like she was taking in more than she'd admit. Then she went back to grading. I didn't know what to say, so I fiddled with the napkin, folding it into smaller and smaller squares. She must have seen, because she asked, "You always this restless?" "Only when I'm not sure if I should say something," I answered. Her eyebrow lifted, just slightly, but she didn't press. That night, I couldn't shake the image of her pen moving across the page, the sound of it scratching. I lay awake longer than I meant to, staring at the ceiling, my phone glowing on the nightstand. No messages. Just the blank text box. The next day in class, she lingered near my desk after everyone else filed out. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of my table. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that I noticed the faint ink stain on her finger. "You stay quiet," she said, almost like an observation more than a critique. "Guess I don't always know what's worth saying," I replied. Her lips curved, not a smile, not exactly. "Stay after next time," she said, her voice low enough that I wasn't sure if anyone else could have heard. "I'll show you what I mean." And just like that, she walked away, leaving the door half open, the hallway light spilling in. I sat there longer than I should have, my hands still folded around a pen I hadn't used all class, wondering if I'd misheard, or if something had just shifted that I couldn't undo. I told myself she probably forgot. That "stay after" was just a passing comment, something professors said without thinking. But the next class, when the clock hit the hour and everyone shuffled out, Miss Carver stayed by her desk, pretending to rearrange papers. Her eyes found mine before I'd even stood up. "Close the door, would you?" she asked. It clicked shut louder than I meant it to. The room suddenly felt smaller. She gestured toward the front row, and I sat, awkward in a chair too small for my legs. She didn't sit behind the desk. Instead, she leaned against it, arms crossed loosely, like she was deciding something. "You're, what, 20? 21. She nodded. When I was your age, I was already married. The words landed heavier than I expected. She wasn't looking at me when she said it, she was staring past the windows, where the late sun striped the floor. Divorced now, she added, softer. I didn't know what to say, so I fiddled with the strap of my backpack. She noticed everything. Most of you, she continued, still think life moves in straight lines. School, job, family. But it doesn't. It bends. Sometimes it breaks. Her voice caught on the last word. Just slightly. Didn't mean to get personal, she said quickly, almost dismissing her own admission. No, I started, then stopped. My throat felt dry. I like hearing it. That earned me a longer look. Steady, measuring. Like she was waiting to see if I'd flinch. Instead, I asked, why literature, then? Why not something else? A small smile flickered. Because books don't leave. They sit there, waiting. You return when you're ready. The silence after that was full but not uncomfortable. I watched her thumb trace the edge of her papers, the faint blue ink still staining her finger. She finally sat, across from me this time, and poured 2 cups of tea from the thermos she always carried. She slid one toward me. It was lukewarm, but I held it carefully, like it mattered. You remind me of my son's friend, she said suddenly. Always quiet, always watching. The mention of her son tightened something in my chest. I didn't know him, but the boundary was there, sharp as glass. Still, her gaze lingered, unbothered by the weight of what she'd just revealed. I sipped the tea, let it scald my tongue a little, and tried not to imagine things I shouldn't, her hand brushing mine, the way her voice might sound if it wasn't in this fluorescent-lit classroom. She must have seen some flicker in my expression, because she leaned back, amused. Don't look so serious. It's only tea. But when she reached across the desk to take my empty cup, her fingers brushed against mine. Barely a touch. It could have been nothing. Just an accident. But her hand stayed a fraction too long before pulling away. And that was worse than anything she could have said out loud. The next week, I waited too long before deciding whether to linger. My classmates filed out, voices echoing down the hallway, and I hesitated at my desk, pretending to search my bag. Ms. Carver stacked her books slowly, like she already knew I'd stay. You're quiet again, she said. Don't know what to say. She tilted her head. That's usually when people say too much. I almost laughed, but the sound caught. I wanted to tell her I'd been replaying every moment in my head, the tea, her hand brushing mine. Instead, I shrugged. My knuckles tapped against the desk, restless. She noticed. She always noticed. Help me carry these, she said, sliding a stack of books into my arms. They were heavier than I expected, the spines worn, notes sticking out from the edges. She led the way down the hall toward her office. The corridor was mostly empty, only the hum of vending machines filling the silence. My heartbeat sounded too loud in my own ears. Inside her office, the air was warm, smelling faintly of paper and lemon cleaner. She set her things down, smoothed her cardigan sleeve, and for a second, it felt almost domestic. Like I wasn't a student. Like I was just someone sitting with her at the end of a long day. I placed the books on her desk and lingered. She leaned against the bookshelf, arms crossed, and studied me. You look like you're carrying something heavier than those books, she said. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. My eyes flicked to the photo frame on her desk, her son, younger than me by a couple of years maybe. That line. Right there, between us. She followed my gaze, then looked away, her jaw tightening. Before I could think of something to say, the knock came. Quick, casual. A colleague, another teacher, poked his head in. Carver, you coming to the meeting? Her tone shifted instantly, professional. I'll be there in a minute. He glanced at me, then back at her, one eyebrow raised. Don't be late, he teased, before disappearing. The silence after he left was sharper than the interruption itself. My chest felt tight. She rubbed her temples like the moment had fractured, like we'd been caught in something that wasn't supposed to be seen. I started. But she shook her head. No. Sit. Just for a minute. I sat, but the chair felt wrong, too formal. My hand rested on the edge of her desk, fingers drumming against the wood. She reached across, not touching, not quite, and pressed her hand over mine to still it. Her skin was warm. Her palm light. Neither of us moved. Her eyes held mine longer than they should have. My breath stuttered, shallow. The space between us seemed to fold in, as if the air itself was pulling tighter. I leaned in, barely. Just enough to feel the brush of her breath. And then she pulled back, standing abruptly. You should go, she said, softer than the words sounded. I left her office with the weight of her almost touch still burning against my skin, knowing we'd stopped just short of something we couldn't take back. It was late afternoon, the kind where the sun fell low enough to stretch shadows across the campus lawn. I caught sight of her outside, sitting alone on a bench beneath the oak trees. A stack of papers rested beside her, untouched. She was just staring, arms folded, cardigan pulled tight. I almost kept walking. But she looked up, and her eyes caught mine before I could look away. She nodded once, like an invitation. I sat at the far end of the bench, careful to leave space. The breeze tugged at loose strands of her hair. For a while, we didn't say anything. I tapped my shoe against the gravel path, trying not to think about how close I'd come to leaning in the other night. You're avoiding me, she said finally. I thought you wanted me to. She let out a quiet laugh. I don't know what I want. The words weren't dramatic. They were tired. She leaned back, her hand resting on the bench between us, fingers curled loosely. I wanted to touch them. I wanted to do nothing. Both impulses fought until I felt restless in my own skin. You remind me too much of myself at your age, she said. Too much waiting. Too many things left unsaid. I can't, she stopped. Drew in a breath. I can't watch someone else do that. I turned toward her. I'm not your son. The words came out sharper than I meant, and I regretted them instantly. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. No. You're not. The silence that followed stretched. My chest burned, full of things I couldn't say. I wanted to tell her she made the hours between classes feel less empty. That the thought of her hands, her voice, lingered longer than it should. Instead, I asked, why did you notice me? She tilted her head. You look like you're always about to leave. Like if no one says anything, you'll disappear. Her voice caught on the last word. The same way it had when she mentioned her divorce. My throat tightened. I almost did, I admitted. Transferred last semester. Didn't. Don't even know why. We looked at each other then, really looked. My heart stumbled, uneven. Her hand shifted closer on the bench, barely an inch. I shouldn't be sitting here, she said. Not like this. Not with you. Then why are you? My voice was barely a whisper. Her eyes flicked to mine, then away, then back again, like she couldn't decide which was more dangerous, holding my gaze, or breaking it. She exhaled slowly. Because I don't feel invisible when you're around. The air between us snapped tight. Her hand brushed mine, feather light, then retreating, as if even that admission had cost her something. I almost reached for her. Almost. But before either of us moved, the campus bell rang in the distance, sharp and metallic, scattering the moment like startled birds. We both looked away, hands folded in our laps, pretending nothing had just happened. The next week, she wasn't there. I walked into class, same time, same seat by the window, but the desk at the front stood empty. A substitute announced she'd taken personal leave. No details. Just the flat statement and the rustle of papers as we pretended it didn't matter. It mattered. I sat through the hour barely hearing a word. Every glance at the front of the room felt wrong, like the stage was missing its lead. I kept waiting for her to push the door open, glasses slipping down her nose, cardigan sleeves bunched at her elbows. But the door stayed shut. When class ended, I didn't linger. There was nothing. This one was lighter, sharper, like it belonged to another life I didn't know. I turned before she could notice me, the sound of it trailing behind. That night, I typed out a message in the blank notes app on my phone. I thought you wanted me to stay after. I stared at it for too long, thumb hovering over the send button that didn't exist, then deleted it. The following week, she returned to class. She looked the same, cardigan, glasses, ink on her fingers, but something in her was tighter. She didn't glance at me once. Not when I stumbled over an answer. Not when the room emptied and I lingered at my desk, waiting. She gathered her papers briskly, slid them into her bag, and left before I could open my mouth. The silence she left behind wasn't ordinary. It was deliberate. I told myself it didn't matter. That I was imagining the distance. That she hadn't seen me outside the cafe, laughing with someone else. But the knot in my chest said otherwise. One evening, I passed by her office. The light was on, spilling under the door. I stopped, hand lifted, ready to knock. Just once. Just to remind her I was still there. But I didn't. I stood in the hallway until the silence pressed too hard, then walked away. The next morning, her seat in the cafe was empty again. It was raining when it finally broke. Not the soft drizzle that passed in minutes, but a steady downpour that blurred the streetlights and filled the gutters. I spotted her leaving campus, umbrella tucked low, cardigan damp at the cuffs. I could have kept walking. Should have. But something in me tightened, the weeks of silence, the missed chances, the words I'd swallowed whole. I quickened my pace until I was beside her. She startled, then softened. You'll get soaked. I shrugged, water dripping from my hair. Doesn't matter. We walked in step, her umbrella tilted just enough to cover us both. The sound of rain on fabric filled the gaps in our conversation. My hand brushed against her sleeve once, then again, the contact small but unbearable. At the corner, she slowed. This is where I turn off. I almost let her go. Almost. But my chest felt too heavy, like if I didn't speak now, the chance would dissolve for good. Why did you pull away? I asked. The words were clumsy, rushed, but honest. Her shoulders tightened under the cardigan. She didn't answer at first, just watched the rain slide down the curb. Finally, because I saw you watching me outside the cafe. And because you saw me with him. I swallowed. Who was he? My ex-husband, she said. We were signing papers. The world tilted slightly. All that distance, all those silences, built on a misunderstanding. I thought, I started. Then stopped. My throat wouldn't finish the sentence. She sighed, shifting the umbrella, her knuckles pale against the handle. It's not about him. It's about me. About this. About how dangerous it feels to need someone again. Her voice cracked on need. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a fault line showing itself. I let the silence stretch, broken only by the rain. My hand clenched at my side. Then, before I could lose my nerve, I said, I need you to know I don't stay after class for the credits. Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp, wet, unguarded. For the first time, she didn't look away. I know, she whispered. Something in me released, but not in triumph. More like grief, relief, fear tangled into one. We stood there, rain slicking our shoes, traffic humming somewhere distant. I wanted to step closer, to erase the space, but I didn't. Instead, I reached for the edge of the umbrella, steadying it where her hand trembled. My fingers brushed hers, light, deliberate. She didn't pull back. For a moment, the whole world shrank to that small gesture, 2 hands balancing the weight of something neither of us could name. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to say more, but all that came out was a soft, exhausted, okay. It was enough. By the time spring settled in, the rain had given way to softer mornings. The kind where the air was cool enough to see your breath, but the sun pressed through anyway, golden and insistent. Classes ended at 8:47 a.m. sharp, but I stopped watching the clock. What mattered wasn't the dismissal, it was what came after. Sometimes, it was just carrying her books down the hall. Sometimes, it was sitting across from her in the cafe, her black coffee going cold while she talked about some line of poetry she couldn't get out of her head. Sometimes, it was silence, the kind that didn't ache anymore. We never said what it was. Not in declarations, not in promises. It wasn't that kind of story. But routines shifted. I noticed she left a second thermos in her bag, and when she poured tea, she poured 2 without asking. She never mentioned it, just slid one across the table, her fingers brushing mine before retreating. And I stopped pretending I only liked the caramel latte. Some mornings I ordered black coffee, no sugar. It was bitter, but familiar. It tasted like her. We sat on the same bench once, under the oak trees. The papers she carried stayed untouched at her side. She looked tired, but not worn down, more like someone settling into herself. "Remember when you said I looked like I was always about to leave?" I asked. She smiled, faint but certain. "You're still here." Her hand rested between us, loose, easy. I covered it with mine. No hesitation this time. No one watching. Just the quiet warmth of skin against skin, ordinary and extraordinary at once. She didn't pull away. She never did after that. Weeks blurred. Final exams passed. Summer pressed closer. My classmates moved on, scattering toward new jobs, new schools. I stayed. Not out of indecision, but because for the first time, staying felt like its own kind of direction. One evening, I walked her home. The streetlights buzzed, and her porch light flickered the way it always had. She unlocked the door, then paused, turning back. "Tea?" she asked, almost offhand, but her eyes gave it weight. I nodded. Stepped inside. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, same as her office had. A mug waited on the counter, mismatched with the others. Mine. She'd started keeping one there. We didn't talk much. Just drank, the steam fogging the edges of our glasses. My hand brushed hers again when I reached for the sugar I didn't need. Neither of us laughed, but both of us noticed. Later, when I left, she stood in the doorway, arms folded against the cool night air. "See you tomorrow," I said. It wasn't a promise. It didn't need to be. Because we both knew we'd be there. The bench. The cafe. The thermos. The time that once felt like something to endure had become something to return to. And when I think of her now, it isn't the rain or the silence or the near steps we didn't take. It's the small things, the folded napkin, the ink-stained fingers, the tea poured without asking. Things only we would understand.